In this video, we're talking about simple meters. This is my meter chart that I've made for my students. If you're one of my students, you should have this out in front of you so that you can fill it in. This is to help you understand how these meters relate to each other. What does the duple, triple, quad mean? What are they saying when they mean beat unit versus beat division versus beat subdivision? And how to get out of just that 4-4 mentality into all these different meter signatures that could happen. So once you've got your chart in front of you, the first thing we're going to fill in is things about what we know. What we know is 4-4 time. 4-4 time is everywhere. So in a 4-4 time signature, notice that in every time signature, your bottom number is telling you what kind of note is getting the beat, and your top number is telling you how many beats there are per measure. So in 4-4, we are saying that the bottom 4 is the quarter note getting the beat. Well, our beat unit is that answer right there. So we're going to draw a quarter note, and we're going to write that when we count this, we count it as a number. So instead of putting 1, 2, 3, 4 underneath it, I'm just going to put a number sign so that I know whichever beat I happen to be on. This beat unit is the number in its entirety. When I go to beat division, well, I'm going to cut that in half because simple meter is all about things dividing into twos. So our simple meter beat division of 4-4 quarter notes becomes 2 eighth notes beamed together. So this becomes a number and you can write that and however you like. I do mine kind of like writing a T without picking up my pen. If you want to write a plus sign, that's fine. If you want to write one of those squiggly little ampersand guys, that's a lot of work, but you can do it. It needs to be an and. Don't put the letter A because the letter A is claimed for something else later. So that's beat unit, beat division. When we get to beat subdivision, we're going to cut everything in half again. So we've gone from 1 things to 2 things to now 4 things. So here are my 4 notes, and I am going to beam them together not as 8th notes, but as 16th notes because I'm cutting these 8th notes in half, which means I now have a number. My and is over here. I have E, and there's the So you got to make sure that is saved for your beat subdivision. Now, when you look at these 3 time signatures right here, all 3 of these obey these rules of having a number on a quarter note, a number and on 8th notes, number E and on 16th notes. What the time signature here is telling you that's different is how many beat units are in a measure. So in a 4-4 measure, you're going to have 4 quarter notes worth of beat units in that measure. In 3-4 time, you're going to have 3 of them. In 2-4 time, you're going to have 2 of them. It's just saying how many beat units. So now we're going to expand our chart into a little bit more complicated territory that you may not have thought of. We'll go up to half notes next. So in this section, we have 2s on the bottom of our time signature, which means the half note is getting the beat. So our beat unit right here is a half note, and we're going to put a number sign for the counts 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., etc., etc. We're going to cut that half note in half, and we get 2 quarter notes. That's our number, and we're going to cut it in half again. So now we have 4 eighth notes, and because those 4 eighth notes are all belonging to 1 beat unit, we are going to beam them together because we want to see them as a whole unit. We would not beam them in sets of 2 because that would imply that this was 1 beat unit and this is a 2nd beat unit, but they're really just 1 because we are in a time signature with a 2 on the bottom, meaning the half note gets the beat. So my beat unit needs to add up to a half note. Now we have 4, 3, and 2 on the top again, so it just means if you're in 2-2 time, there are 2 half notes worth of beats in a measure. If you're in 3-2 time, there are 3 half notes in a measure. If you're in 4-4 time, there are 4 half notes in a measure. Now you can apply the same concept to every box in this frame. So if I was looking at the 8th notes in 3-2 time, well, I can say there are 3 of these boxes in a measure. So 3 times 4 is 12. That means if I had all 8th notes, I would have 12 8th notes in my measure. So it's kind of nice to be able to say, okay, I understand. I can use this as a copy paste per beat. This is 1 beat, this is 1 beat, this is 1 beat. They're all equal. Let's go to whole notes. Whole notes get a little bit funny as we get into doubling them and stuff in compound meter. For now, our beat unit is a whole note. So there's our whole, that gets the number sign. We're gonna cut it in half for our beat division. There's number and same counting system. And then we're gonna cut these in half again, giving us 4 quarter notes. Number, E, and I didn't put that here, so I'll put it here too. Now you might be thinking, wow, this looks a lot like 4/4. Well, that's because you're looking at a box and thinking that box is a measure, but that box is not a measure. That box is 1 beat. So if I was gonna have 4/1 time signature, that means I've got 4 whole notes in a measure, which would be very, very confusing to look at, especially if you get down to beat subdivision, because I would have 4 of these boxes in a measure if I was using all quarter notes for that measure. So 4 times 4 is 16. 16 quarter notes in a measure is very, very ugly. You can see why we wouldn't usually want to use that time signature. It is possible, however. Using time signatures that use the beaming helps our eyes see across the page much easier for those beat units. We're gonna jump down here to 8th notes now. For 8th notes, the 8th note is getting the beat because 8 is on the bottom of our time signature. So we're gonna draw a little 8th note right here. Just 1, because 1 8th note is getting a beat. We're gonna put a number sign, and then we're gonna cut it in half for our beat division. We're gonna divide that 8th note into 2 16th notes. Because it is 1 beat, we are going to keep them beamed together. So now we're counting this number and. Then we're gonna cut them in half again, which is gonna give us 4 things. So here's our 4 notes. And 4. We went from 1 flag to 2 beams, which means we're going to 3 beams over here. It's gonna get very tight. There's 3 beams. So we have an 8th note, 16th notes, 32nd notes. Number, E, and up. Oh boy, can't wait for 16th as our beat unit. We're gonna need really long stems for this one, so be prepared. For our 16ths, we're gonna start by drawing a single 16th note. It's gonna have 2 little flags right there, and that gets a number sign. Then we're gonna cut it in half, so we need some long stems here. Yep. So that we can add a 3rd beam, 2 flags, 3 beams. This becomes your number and your and. Then we're gonna have 4. And now we're gonna get a little bit crazy. So here's 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, makes it 16ths. 3 makes it 32nds. And 4 makes it 64ths. So you've got a 16th note, a 32nd note, and a 64th notes. All right, here you've got 8ths, 16ths, and 32nds. This is our number, E, and So now you should be able to count properly in any time signature if you're in a simple meter. So all you want to do now to label meters is make sure you're following along whether it's in this chart for simple and what type, duple, triple, quad. So if there are 2 main beat units, that means you're in the duple column. If there are 3 beat units, you're in the triple column. 4 beat units is the quad or quadruple column. And this is a great way to be able to transpose music. If I was going to take an example rhythm, let's have 4/4 time signature, and I just made something really simple. Quarter note, 2/8 notes beamed together to show our beat unit. Let's do another quarter note, but let's put a dot on it, and let's put an 1/8 note at the end here. A lovely little measure. So you can see that our beat counting system would be a 1, a 2, and a 3, and there's a little and that's in here, there's a little and in here, little 4, and this last one is the and of 4. Well, that's great because it's 4/4 time and we're used to it. However, what if I put it in a super funky meter? So over here, let's choose, we'll just do 4/8 for a moment. So if I change this to a 4/8 meter, I have to change the size of my notes. What I'm not going to change is the counting system. The counting system will remain the same. I will still have a 1. I'll have a little and, big 2, big and, big 3, little and, little 4, big and at the end. So what I want to think is, what is my beat unit in the first one versus the second one? The first one, my beat unit is a quarter note. The second one, my beat unit is a 1/8 note. So what was a quarter note becomes an 1/8. So everything is getting smaller. So this quarter note right here would become an 1/8 note, and it would not be beamed to anything because it is an entire beat unit by itself. The 1/8 note needs to remain as just a flag. Then we have 2 1/8 notes. Well, we're going to have to make 2 things out of an 1/8 note here, so that means we've got 2 16th notes. All right, and then we have a dotted quarter. We're going to cut that quarter in half into an 1/8 note. So we're going to have a dotted 1/8 note. Little flag. And then our final 1/8 note at the end is going to get cut in half as well and become a 16th note. Now that follows along very well with our chart, because if I look at things with a 4 in the bottom versus things with an 8 in the bottom, our quarter note becomes an 1/8 note. Our 1/8 notes become 16th notes. Our 16th notes become 32nd notes. So there you go. That's how you can change visually from one time signature to another. Now the number of beats needs to remain the same. The 4 on the top will remain the same in both, but you can do this across any of these rows to change it. It does not change how it sounds. A lot of people get very confused and think that this is going to be faster. However, the way tempo works, a quarter note here, we could say that the tempo says the quarter note equals 120. So that means we're hearing a quarter note 120 times per minute, right? Beats per minute. Now this is our beat unit, right? So all I gotta do is change my beat unit down here to say my tempo of an 1/8 note is equal to 120. So they're really the same speed. If you were hearing them without looking at them, they would sound exactly the same. And that's simple meter in a nutshell. There you go.